We're getting a whole lot closer to this upcoming Duke basketball season. We now have a full schedule to discuss. Practice is taking place. It's just the best time of year. Let's have a great show here on Locked On Blue Devils.
Hi, everybody. Dick Vitale. Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. It's so great to have you here with us on this Thursday, September 28th, 2023. Hope that you're doing well here today as we're getting ready for the upcoming Duke basketball season. A lot of things that we're going to be talking about on the podcast. The schedule is now here for Duke basketball. Practice is taking place, and it's the perfect time of year as our good pal Brandon Marks of The Athletic joins us here on the show today. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free wherever you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. Watch the show there each and every day as your support continues to mean the most to us here on the program. So, without further ado, let me bring on my good pal, the aforementioned Brendan Marks of The Athletic, who joins us now here on the show. Brendan, the time is always greatly appreciated. A good time of year, basketball season on the horizon, football season in full swing in the fall. And man, it's just great to chat with you here today.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I always love coming on. So I appreciate you having me, JJ.
Here we are, basketball season. Practice has opened up. We've got a schedule that we'll get into here in just a little bit. 39 days away from November 6th when Duke takes on Dartmouth. So that countdown is taking place. The ticker's moving because we'll be watching an actual game that counts for Duke basketball here in no time.
Yeah, it's wild how quickly it's come. You know, I feel like September has just flown by, but, you know, seeing all of the posts and social media accounts, you know, sort of firing off for the first day of practice at Duke, obviously, but just around the college basketball world, it gets me excited. Obviously, you know, this is my baby. This is what I care about the most. So I'm really excited for the season. I think it's going to be a fun one. And I think there's still a lot we can learn before the start of the season. So I'm looking forward to, you know, sort of seeing where things actually end up against Dartmouth.
Well, we want to talk about some of those things that we can learn in the days and weeks to come. Obviously, still 39 days away from a game being played. We've got Media Day coming up here soon for the Blue Devils and sort of this training camp. What is this time of year for now that the first official practice? Is this more of a training camp type feel, or how do you envision these first few weeks before you've got countdown and exhibitions and that sort of thing? What's going on?
Yeah, I don't know if like people realize this, but this is the most important time of year. I mean, this is really, you know, once you get into a season, especially once you get into conference play, there's only so much that you can actually be teaching just because there's not enough time. You know, in any given week between games, between recovery, between travel, classes, you know, basic conditioning, like there is only so much time to be teaching new things. And so this is the time of year when Duke is really starting to install systems, starting to develop, okay, hey, you know, this is what we want to do defensively. How does this work? How does it work with these people? How does it work if we switch out these people? This is the time of year when all of that, you know, foundational stuff is being implemented. And so the past couple of weeks before this, obviously they're important, especially for conditioning, for skills, for camaraderie, all that sort of stuff. But I would argue that this next month sort of leading up to the start of the season is the most impactful month for sort of, you know, setting where you can go. Obviously, teams can improve over the course of the season, but what you do in October really sort of lays the groundwork for how the season gets off to, you know, a start. And in Duke's case, you've got a lot of tough games early. So this has to be a really critical time.
From the teaching perspective, because again, I think that is a great point. Obviously, there's recovery that's got to take place right now because you haven't really been in this practice setting. And okay, wow, we're getting back into the conditioning and that sort of thing. Nowhere near what you're going to feel when games are being played. So from that teaching perspective, I would imagine the job is a little bit easier with the number of returners that are factoring into this year's Duke squad compared to where John Shire was a year ago as he goes into year one.
Yeah, you know, just a little bit. Having two returners last year, I don't think was the easiest thing in the world for John. Yeah. But no, you know, obviously things are much easier this year. And I think the thing is probably not getting enough credit, and I have thought about this a lot, is, we talk so much about the returners, and obviously they are hugely important to whatever Duke's going to do this year. Jeremy, Tyrese, Mark, Kyle, even Ryan Young, Jalen Blakes, Jaden Schutt, Christian Reeves, if he ends up seeing time, like all of those guys being back is hugely important. But this is also Shire's second time around getting to do an off season. And this is the first one really without the pressure of, okay, it's your first time succeeding Coach K. It's your first time doing everything. So I'm really interested to see sort of how he's handling it, to hear from him on how, maybe he's done some things differently, what he's kept the same. But that, I think, is a really underrated element. As good as Duke's players are, John still has to get them all in the right place and moving in the right direction together. And so that's, hugely important right now.
It's got to be a fun challenge, right? A unique challenge that he didn't experience a year ago, and now he's got something a little bit different on his plate. He's got big pieces returning and factoring in to what this squad's going to look like. We look at last year's team with those 4 starters coming back into the fold. So many people want to talk about the 5th starter, the timeline that could be in place and making that decision. How frequently could a position like this be changing throughout the year? There are just so many questions regarding that 5th starter, and we're going to talk about some of those, Brendan, after our first time out here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. That's right, it's the perfect time of year to talk about FanDuel as the NFL season is now in full swing. Exciting Thursday night football matchup tonight between the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions. Your classic NFC North Division tilt, and FanDuel has all the best lines and odds for you. It is America's #1 sports book. New customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, then there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. We move forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Again, JJ Jackson alongside my pal Brendan Marks of The Athletic. All right, the 5th starter, a big piece that so many people are kind of talking about. I guess, first and foremost, do we feel good about those 4 starters from last year holding on to their job going into the year, and what does that do for that 5th spot?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reason those guys came back. I would be, barring injury, I would be very surprised if all 4 of those guys were not already locked into their roles. I will say this, while they're all going to be starting, what they're going to be asked to do, I do think is going to be a little bit different, especially in the front court. But I'm sure we'll continue to get into that as it relates to this 5th starter.
So with that 5th starter in mind, then a couple of different options that could factor in. A decision that goes into this. How many people do you think truly kind of fit that mold? When does the timeline kind of fit together for you in your head, Brendan?
Yeah, to me, there's really, based on everything I've heard so far coming out of practices, sort of the off-season circuit, guys.
We've had a long off-season to be thinking about this.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's not just the practices. Guys have been going to the Steph Curry camp, and they've been going to these other camps. And so when they're, jetting around, you hear things from various people who are there too. But to me, I am 95% confident that 5th starter is going to be a perimeter player. Everything I understand is that that's how Duke wants to play. Duke wants to play a little smaller this year. They have so much skill, so much shooting, so much spacing and especially they have so many guys who are capable and deserving of minutes on the perimeter that not having 3 of them out there at any one given time is kind of a detriment to the talent you have. So to me, it's basically a 2-horse race. And I do think it's one that could fluctuate over the course of the year. Right now, if I was forecasting who it's going to be, I think it's either going to be Jared McCain or TJ Power in that last spot. I think, as we've talked about, you have your backcourt with Jeremy Roach and Tyrese Proctor. We saw the strides that Proctor made on ball last year. He's, I think, going to continue to have a lot of success in the pick and roll. He was absolutely eating up drop coverage by the end of last year. Again, that's sort of what I'm expecting a continuation of from him. Jeremy Roach off ball, shooting, being more of an aggressive attacking guy, not setting the table nearly as much. And then in the front court, with Mark Mitchell and Kyle Filipowski, you have 2 guys who have a lot of size, but are going to be asked to do some different things. So, I don't think we're going to see as much Mark Mitchell out on the perimeter. That's still going to be the case, obviously, and Filipowski's going to be out there. We saw a lot of 5-out stuff from John last year. I think we're going to continue to see that. But if it is McCain, if it is Power in that final starting spot, you're talking about someone who can really space the floor. You're talking about someone who can move the ball, somebody who can handle the ball. I think it's going to be a lot less Tyrese and Jeremy only initiating versus what we saw last year. I think there's going to be a lot more creation from that third starter spot as well. And it looks like those two guys, like I said, are in the front runner spot for it just because of the strong off seasons they've had. Both of them have really impressed. Sean Stewart and Caleb Foster have too, but McCain and Power so far have separated themselves a little bit.
Pretty good shooting options that you've got out there as well. I would imagine that's got to factor in. Obviously, Duke, some of the shooting numbers you really want to improve from what you saw a season ago. And you look at these two freshmen, kind of feel good about their ability to knock down shots from the outside right out of the gates. A little bit of a deeper distance than you're used to in high school basketball, but these are, from what everybody is telling us, Brendan, pretty premier shooters that could make a big impact from the outside for Duke.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that conversation starts with Jared. I think he's one of the best shot-making guards in the class. He is somebody that NBA scouts are already really excited about. I've had a couple of people hit me up about him just so far already this year. But obviously he and TJ Power present different things if they were to be that fifth star. So with Jared, it is the shooting conversation. He's somebody who is going to be a connective player, obviously can handle it, has played some combo guard. I think there will be some creation stuff there, but you're getting a floor spacer. And especially with how much attention is going to be paid to Mark Mitchell and Kyle Filipowski inside, that's hugely important. As we saw last year, relying on one guy to make 3-point shots is not necessarily a recipe for success. And, that was the one real offensive weakness this team had last year, was it did not have any consistent floor spacers. So, yeah, Jared certainly provides that, and I think that's the biggest argument in favor of that. Defensively with him, if he is the fifth starter, I think it allows you to, maybe do some more blitzing, maybe to be a little bit more aggressive defensively, to play faster, certainly. TJ Power, obviously, on the other hand, gives you much more traditional size, rather than starting sort of three guards. You are starting someone who is a legit 6'8", has some of that size, probably helps you out a little more defensively, can do some more natural stuff. But again, also a great shooter. When we were able to go in early this summer and witness practice for a little bit, Power was the guy who impressed me the most. I mean, his shot looks so replicable. He looks so smooth. He's much bigger and stronger than I expected him to be. Like I think he looks in a lot of his photos, and I didn't have the privilege of seeing him play live before he got to Duke, but he looks kind of lean. In person, not the case. I mean, he looks like he's pretty built for a freshman. So they both offer different things, but the general idea is the same with both of them.
When we get to the games being played on the floor, and in so many ways, this will answer a lot of questions. Is this something that you see could be changing frequently? Is it going to be a whole lot easier to kind of make these decisions once we get into game action? Because as we've talked about a lot, the schedule is now released. That was more of the questions of when do the ACC games kind of fall in order. We've known all along that some of these big non-conference tilts are pretty early out of the gate. So in terms of making decisions in personnel and whatnot with those non-conference games in place, it's got to be a little different once you see those games unfold.
Yeah, I think that John is going to give both of them an opportunity. I think that spot is totally open. I think that spot is up for grabs right now. And, I've had a couple of people ask me, what about Ryan Young? I don't think that that's part of the plan. Like I'm fairly certain it will be a perimeter player. But yeah, I think we saw last year with Ryan and Derek, obviously John gave both of them opportunities. When Derek was struggling, he took him out of the lineup and put Ryan in. So, let's say, for example, he starts, Power in the first game or two of the year. Maybe he doesn't have the sort of success you're looking for. Could I see him making a switch by game 3? Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the things that we learned about John last year, and is that he is not necessarily set in his ways. The Derek situation was one where he was constantly having to juggle, okay, how do I use this guy? How do I, get the most out of him? So I think that, obviously you want to find continuity. You want guys to settle into their roles. And once Duke got to that point in February, that's when they took off. But I do think, especially early on in the year, you got to see how guys play with each other. Maybe, one of McCain or Power looks better coming off the bench. Maybe when they have a little more autonomy, maybe they fit better next to Foster. Those are the sorts of things you just can't know until you're actually in in the game and you're seeing them unfold. But yeah, I think both those guys will have their opportunities. And listen, if Sean Stewart, makes some leaps, if Caleb Foster comes on and has a really strong couple of weeks of practice, like I'm not saying by any means that it has to be one of those two. Just at this point right now, if we were measuring, like those are the two guys who have started to put themselves a little bit ahead.
You're watching and listening to Locked On Blue Devils here today on this Thursday, September 28th, alongside my pal Brendan Marks of The Athletic. I'm JJ Jackson. So, Brendan, as we look at the days and weeks to come, 39 days away here from the first game of the season, what kind of coverage are you having? You're going to be gearing up. It's training camp for you, right, before we kind of get into the full swing of things. So tell folks a little bit about your coverage.
Yeah, so all of my stories appear on theathletic.com. If you don't have a subscription, I know I'm biased, but I think we have the best, most comprehensive sports writing in the world. You get my stuff, you get our whole college basketball team, you get our college football coverage of the incredible Duke football program right now. Actually, we've got a reporter coming to town to do a little something special on Duke football right now. So, but yeah, this is the time of year for me where we really get to know the rosters. We really get to know the lineups, the different permutations, but also this is sort of the last chance for us as well to have time with guys one-on-one. So there's a project I've been working on for a couple of months now that should come out in the middle of October. Another one that should come out middle of November. So those are the ones where, for me, I get to really learn about these people off the court and sort of how they got to this point. And especially the one in October, I think will teach Duke fans something that they didn't know, because it's been teaching me a lot that I didn't know.
Oh, can't wait. Excited to see that come out, and be sure to read all that over at The Athletic. So as we wind down today, before we get out of here, I did mention kind of the schedule now being in place. We know who's in the ACC, although you could argue that has been up for debate with a lot of the conference realignment talks taking place throughout the offseason. But in terms of this basketball season, 23-24, kind of had an idea of who you would see on the schedule for Duke, maybe not as familiar with the order in which they would be played. Maybe you have to remind yourself, okay, who does Duke play twice this year versus just once? So when you look at that ACC schedule coming together for Duke, what was notable to you? What should the fans know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really good one if you're a Duke basketball fan. I thought it was incredibly advantageous. There are some, looking across the league, some teams get some tough starts. Syracuse, for example, plays at Virginia, has Duke at home, and then, I mean, that is a brutal start to your schedule. I think Duke will be favored in probably its first 7 or 8, conference games. I think if Duke were to start, I mean, again, anything can happen, but they're going to be favored in all of those games. I think it's an incredibly fortuitous setup. They don't play anybody outside of Pitt, who made the NCAA tournament, until basically late February. And again, there are some tricky ones in there. Obviously there's the Duke UNC game early in February is always one to watch, but I think Duke will be able to put itself in a position in the standings relatively early on in conference play to where, once we do get to late February, there's that Miami game I'm looking at. I think it's on the 21st of February. That is one I've kind of got circled. Could I see that being for the ACC regular season championship? Absolutely. So Duke, I do think, has the benefit of sort of easing its way in and getting to the tougher games, and hopefully is preparing itself to be at its best, right after that, and once March hits.
A couple of things that we're always used to seeing on the schedule, obviously not going to surprise some people. Their last game of the regular season is going to be against those Tar Heels. But again, in terms of the teams that Duke will play twice this season, you factor in Georgia Tech, Louisville, also Pittsburgh in the mix as well. If you were kind of drawing teams to play twice in a season, look at, if people are watching us on YouTube, absolutely, the eyeballs get pretty big with the cards that Duke was dealt for this year.
I mean, this is not the same Pitt team as last year. There's been a lot of turnover there, and I think Cable's a good coach, but it's a different team now. So, certainly, that is a very advantageous draw. I'll to be polite, I think I'll leave it at that. Duke could have done much worse, and you know what? I think to some extent the non-conference is going to give them that challenge early. They're going to get punched in the face 4 times before November's over. They've got so many good non-conference opponents, but certainly once January hits, it'll be, not to take your foot off the gas, but it's not like it's going to be a gauntlet right from the get-go, I don't think.
All right, so here we are. We've got Pembroke on November 1st for Duke in an exhibition, and then November 6th is that game against Dartmouth. Of course, we know about Arizona, Michigan State, Baylor, Arkansas, all in the non-conference for Duke. Just one quick thought, Brendan, on that non-conference play for the Blue Devils.
That's awesome. It's awesome. It's the best thing. And you know what? You know what it does? It positions Duke to be in the same spot, really, that it's been in the league for the last 2 years. Duke has been the team to get in terms of the net, in terms of building your ranking, in terms of proving yourself. And, last year Duke started out as a top 10 team, had a couple of slips in the non-conference, and then sort of built themselves back up. But now you're starting at the top, and you're getting the top of the top. So, for me, that Arizona game is going to be fascinating. Caleb Love making his return to Durham is going to be incredible theater. I mean, the dude is a content machine. Michigan State is obviously going to be great. Baylor in the Garden, that could be really interesting. At Arkansas, I mean, there's obviously a lot of history between these two teams. So I think it's a really challenging non-conference. I think it's the kind, if you're John, that you want. Like, you're going to be a national title contender. If you don't have the opportunity to position yourself against teams of that caliber in the non-conference, it can be a little bit of a wake-up call, like it was for Duke against Tennessee last March. So I think it's beneficial. I think it's exactly what you want. And, Duke doesn't have to be perfect in those games in order to hit its ceiling this year.
Brendan, as always, the time is so greatly appreciated. 39 days away. They'll fly by before we know it. I'm sure we'll even be talking again before that season kind of gets ramped up and going and that sort of thing. Thank you again for stopping by the show today. We'll do this again soon, okay?
Thank you. I went from the wedding countdown to the season countdown immediately. There was no break in between, JJ.
We'll talk to you again soon, Brendan, okay?
Thanks. Talk to you.
All right. That's Brendan Marks of The Athletic joining us here on the show, and we're excited for Duke basketball season. Again, 39 days away. That'll do it for our program today. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.